Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 3. And while there are plenty of fan bases across this fine country already in panic mode, there are some making their plans to visit Las Vegas so their favorite franchise can vie for the Lombardi Trophy. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, I should say as always, but he had a brief family situation to take care of, but he's back in the saddle with us this week. Payne Insider, and Payne, hope all is well on the family front, my friend.
We're back. You and Billy did a fantastic job carrying the torch for Bet the Board.
You know, I tried to put Billy through a little bit of rookie hazing. He handled it with aplomb, carried himself like a consummate professional, and was very proud of the effort he put forth in your absence. So we just have to prove that the depth chart is here. There's no such thing as cluster injuries around the Bet the Board home offices, and the machine rolls on. But we have plenty of ground to cover. Let's get into some of the games this weekend. And while the matchups on paper may not be nearly as sexy as college, there's still hopefully plenty of money-making opportunities. And we'll start things off on Thursday night in the Bay Area, where the San Francisco 49ers welcoming the New York Giants. The Giants, of course, staying out west after that improbable comeback Sunday afternoon against the Arizona Cardinals. The Giants, though, the dubious distinction of being the first team since the 1978 Colts to allow 60 unanswered points to start a season, yet they find themselves at 1-1. When we look at how double-digit favorites on Thursday Night Football have performed going back to 2015, not a large sample size, 8-4 ATS, but double-digit favorites overall on Thursdays, 40-4 straight up, 28-16 ATS with a much more significant sample size. But this is a role Brian Daboll is more than comfortable to be in, 7-1 ATS as a road underdog as head coach of the New York Football Giants. When you look at the numbers here, we're seeing San Francisco a 10.5-point favorite, total on the game 44. And Payne, I guess the simple handicap to approaching this game, do the Giants have enough to slow down that tenacious defensive front from the San Francisco 49ers?
Yeah, I think that's probably the obvious key factor here, and it's something we outlined in the opener against the Cowboys. And I think it's something you probably need to consider anytime you're attempting to bet the Giants or handicap one of their games, when they're playing a decent pressure front. And so far, they haven't really proven to be able to keep Daniel Jones upright. Poor guy's been pressured 48% of dropbacks through 2 games. And you look against the Steelers and Rams, that 49ers defense, 5th in pressure rate despite blitzing at the 7th lowest rate. That's the best kind of pressure you can get, right? Getting to the quarterback without having to send extra guys and leaving yourself exposed in the back. Now, you look at the injuries and why this spread's a little higher than probably it should be, is the left side of the Giants' offensive line is gone, right? Starting left tackle Andrew Thomas is out with a hamstring. Best lineman by a mile on the roster. You have your starting left guard, Ben Breederson, won't clear the concussion protocol in time. So you're starting 2 new guys on the left. You have your rookie center, Evan Neal at right tackle. We kind of warned you of this coming into the season. Like, boy, not a good rookie year. Struggled throughout camp. Right now, Evan Neal graded out tackle number 72 out of 73 qualifiers the first 2 weeks in pass protection. So
we want to ask who number 73 is? Do I want to know that answer?
Someone nobody knows is the answer, right? No, I can tell you it wasn't anybody drafted 7th overall in the draft in 2022.
Well played.
So,
well played, my friend.
I think, when you look at potentially what Kafka and Daboll do here, I'm sure they understand the areas where you need to attack the 49ers defense, and it's outside, it's intermediate, it's deep. Daniel Jones typically is throwing short due to all the pressure. And it was finally good to see him push the ball downfield during that comeback against Arizona in the second half, but 49ers a little bit of a different beast, obviously. The other thing I would expect here from the Giants offense is Daniel Jones' legs a little bit more. We know how much of a factor those have been in the last few seasons, but if you look especially on second and third downs, that's where San Francisco's allowed some of these mobile quarterbacks, and not even some mobile quarterbacks, right? Quarterback runs in general. I think Kafka and Daboll will be smart enough to kind of utilize some route concepts that draw Fred Warner out of the middle of the field and allow Daniel Jones to take off a bit here. There's one more factor I think is probably worth mentioning here, and we can kind of cover this pretty quickly. But the other side is obviously a little bit of a mismatch with Shanahan's offense that's basically scored 30 or more in every Brock Purdy start going against a very, very predictable Giants defense on a short week. You look at that side of the ball, and it's like, what is Wink Martindale doing? Like, he's just asking far too much of his corners. And right now, the Giants' defense has regressed to start this season relative to how it finished last year. And you think about some of the matchups, right? You got the torrential downpour in week 1, and then you were facing a bottom-of-the-barrel Arizona offense in week 2, and somehow you're 27th in defensive efficiency, you're 27th in EPA per rush allowed, and you got to be able to stop the outside zone runs for the 49ers. The other thing is the predictable blitzes that Wink is sending are not getting home. The Giants have the 4th highest blitz rate outside the top 20 in pressure rate, the inverse of what's going on with San Francisco's defense. Now, you look at the sample size, it's pretty small, 51 pass attempts for his career, but Brock Purdy basically feasting on defenses that send pressure and don't get home, 75% completion rate. Shanahan's system, we've talked about it all the time, it's built for yak. So if you're sending the extra guy and it's not getting home, and Purdy finds that guy, there's typically less defenders available to make some tackles. So that's something to consider here. Let's keep an eye on the Brandon Ayuk shoulder injury. He's typically the receiver that fares a little bit better against defenses that play man. Debo usually the guy against zone. Giants play a ton of man. Think about last week. The Rams play a ton of zone. It was a Debo game. So keep an eye on Ayuk's status here. But to me, just kind of putting the final note on this one, like, it's just... There's a battle on the side, right? Pros on both sides. Total open 45.5. Chris now down below the key of 44 to 43.5. I get that Saquon and Thomas and Breederson are out, and Ayuk's questionable. It's just kind of, let's see where this goes. It's hard to fathom a total this low with Daboll and Shanahan going against each other, and one of the defenses, bottom 5 in the league.
I wanted to ask you real quick on the Saquon situation. Obviously, we know he's become one of the few 3-down backs in the NFL. How big a drop-off do you see for the Giants' ground game going to Matt Breida, Gary Brightwell, and some of the other cast of characters they could trot out there in Barkley's absence?
Yeah, it's massive, especially to this offense. He's done everything for them, whether it's running or whether it's catching balls out of the backfield. When you look at a matchup against the 49ers, they do a pretty good job stopping the run. I'm not sure how much push the Giants were going to get in the ground game. And the areas you don't really want to attack the 49ers through the air is over the middle. So you look at the Giants typically, getting the ball to running backs and tight ends in that area, it probably wasn't going to be the recipe for success. So to this offense, based upon what I know, and it's a decent amount, probably worth a point. I do think you're probably going to see Waller line up a little bit more outside tonight. That would be my vibe. I think you're probably going to see some deeper throws to some of those receivers. The word is Wan'Dale Robinson's going to potentially get going. I don't know what his impact's going to be in his first game back, but you want to push the ball down the field, right? Like, get Hyatt, some free releases through some scheme, through some motion, and get him downfield. Get Hodgins downfield a little bit. Remember what we kind of said this offseason we were previewing the San Francisco 49ers is like the team's got elite talent. There's just not a ton of depth. They're a little, outside of Charvarius Ward, internally they're a little nervous with their ability to cover downfield. And so you got to find a way to just give Daniel Jones just enough time for him to push the ball into the intermediate and deep areas, because that's where you can find some success against the 49ers defense.
And Jalen Hyatt had his de facto coming out party of sorts last week in the comeback against the Arizona Cardinals. Only 2 catches, but made them count, providing that vertical threat that the Giants expected when they drafted him this year out of Tennessee. From Thursday to Sunday, and a pair of teams sitting at 0-2 looking to try and salvage the start to their season. The Los Angeles Chargers, second straight week on the road, this time at US Bank Stadium to take on the Minnesota Vikings. And we're looking at Minnesota, a modest 1-point home favorite. Total been bet up a touch from where it opened out to 54. When we look at the Vikings, they're now 0-2 this regular season after going 11-0 in the regular season last year in one-score games. Third time in the last 4 years, the Minnesota Vikings have started their campaign 0-2. When we look at the Chargers, they're 0-2 despite having a 4-point lead in the fourth quarter in each of their first 2 games. And a dubious distinction here, Payne. They become the 34th team in the Super Bowl era with 50-plus points and no turnovers through 2 games. However, they are the only one of those 34 teams to start their season 0-2. When we look at the Chargers, we talk about this team all the time. 7-2 ATS the last 9 games as a road underdog. Meanwhile, the Vikings, the betting market's caught up to them and then some in a limited sample size, going just 1-5-1 against the number over their last 7 games. When we look at this Chargers team offensively against the Vikings defense, they couldn't score a single touchdown in their 4 offensive possessions this past Sunday. Near the end of the game, when they had to go out and convert just once to get their first victory of the season, you look at the sequence at the end of regulation, the 3-and-out to start overtime, and it continues to be a reflection of everything that has plagued the Chargers. We know what Keenan Williams can do. We know how valuable Mike Williams is as a viable deep threat, but the offense loses a little bit of punch without Austin Eckler, and most signs point to him not being available for this week's matchup. When you look at the Chargers and the best attack plan to go after a Minnesota defense that likes to be multiple with new defensive coordinator Brian Flores, who has the edge on this side of the football?
I think both offenses have the edge in this one, but you just look at these two teams. They're so erratic, both of them. Like, we typically have high hopes for the Chargers because of the talent, and you can see their peak, but they rarely reach it and ultimately end up underachieving relative to expectation. And then you think about the Vikings. Oof. I mean, just the last 2 seasons have been upside down, right? I mean, 2021 played like a double-digit win team, but had horrific luck and variance. Then won 13 last year, played more like an 8-9 win team, and now you kind of meet in this virtual pick'em game where they usually play their best, right? Chargers on the road, Vikings at home. So there is a lot of weirdness to this game, but both teams are in search of a win, right? Because you go to 0-3 in the seasons, their season's all but done. But there should not be a reason, to your main question, the Chargers don't find offensive success here. And they've found it the first 3 quarters. It's just been struggle bus in the fourth quarter. The Chargers are actually moving the ball quite well. 4th in EPA per play the first 3 quarters, 5th in success rate, even better in total yards accrued. And then Herbert and the offense kind of throw up on themselves in crunch time. It's what we've seen the last 2 weeks. Now, I'll be interested to see Kellen Moore's game plan. He's tried to stay a little bit too balanced for my liking. Found success, obviously, on the ground against the Dolphins, but part of that was Austin Eckler, who, to your point, seems pretty questionable here. And then even last week, without Austin Eckler, against a great Titans run defense, you look at Kellen Moore's neutral game script, the run percentage was like 41%. And on the season, the Chargers are 2% below their expected pass rate. So I would think you want to up the rate of throws here. Now, I understand that you just saw the Eagles gash the Vikings on the ground, so my suspicion might be that Kellen Moore tries to be somewhat balanced early. But I think the Chargers are going to have real success throwing it. You mentioned Brian Flores. I think he's cognizant, right, that he just doesn't have a ton of talent or depth on defense right now. If you look at the Vikings through 2 weeks, they're basically a blitz and play zone coverage behind it team. The problem is the blitz hasn't gotten home. So you're looking at Flores is dialing up blitz at the highest rate in the league, 49%. Vikings are just 23rd. In pressure rate. Marcus Davenport is battling an injury, hasn't played much at all this season. The Vikings are also leading the league in zone coverage usage, right? 91%, because Flores doesn't trust the cornerbacks yet. And if you kind of look at that matchup, right, the game within the game, the Chargers offensive line is held up really well so far this season, right? Rashawn Slater is that dude, like 0.7% blown block rate. Now, who kind of joked a little bit off air here, it's like Herbert is chosen to be a pocket statue through 2 games. Hopefully he starts becoming a little bit more mobile there and presenting that threat to the defense, because we know how efficient quarterback runs can be, whether scripted or off script. But he's only been pressured on 26% of dropbacks because that Vikings O-line is doing really well. So you would suspect Herbert's going to be throwing from some clean pockets here. You would project the Vikings blitzes to not be totally effective again, which if you look, Justin Herbert's really kind of skewer defenses that zone blitz and don't get home. 74% completion rate for his career, averaging more than 8.5 yards per attempt in those situations. So I think there's going to be some ability here for the Chargers to move the ball through the air. Now, a lot of those targets, you mentioned Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Johnston to a certain extent.
They're starting to call him a bust already. It's been 2 games for the poor kid out of TCU.
Didn't love the draft pick myself, but here we are. They're not a lot of...
Zay Flowers might not look better in powder blue?
Well, I mean, just provide a different style of receiver, right? There's not a lot of burst with that trio.
No.
Right? Like, get a guy who can get open quickly. Get a guy who can really, truly threaten downfield. Like, there's just not a lot of... You got Palmer, but, like... I don't know. There's not like a complement to the receiver core. You can just like take the top off a defense. So I think that's where they're struggling a little bit to get the easy stuff. But I think they'll have success here, right? Whether it's probably going to be okay running it, even though it's not the most efficient avenue. But I think you're going to have some success here, especially if Herbert's kept upright.
When we look on the other side of the ball at this Vikings offense, they obviously need to clean things up. 6 fumbles lost this season, the most through 2 games since the 2003 Rams. When you look at Minnesota from an offensive line perspective, they've allowed pressure on just 28% of their 88 dropbacks, but this is a mash unit up front. I mean, Oli Udoh lost for the season. Christian Darrisaw didn't play last Thursday. Garrett Bradbury missed last week. You go out and you sign Dalton Reisner. For anybody who's followed our Broncos handicaps over the years, some of our feelings there are well documented in terms of his versatility, both as a run and a pass blocker. Better at one than he is at the other. But Kirk Cousins obviously, fairly or unfairly, draws a ton of criticism from a pure stat perspective. Look, he wasn't the problem against Philadelphia. Went out there, did his part, threw 4 touchdowns, and has the second highest QBR through the first 2 weeks of the season. But the Vikings, Payne, are getting absolutely nothing from their ground game. There's no balance here whatsoever. They go out and they trade a couple of draft picks to bring in Cam Akers from the Rams to help fully bolster that. But through 2 games, the Vikings do not have a single rush of more than 10 yards. I'm not sure you just abandon the ground game, but when you have the receivers the Vikings do that can operate in space, maybe you're best served to throw it 70% of the time against this Chargers secondary.
Yeah, well, they have abandoned it, right? I mean, 91% of their yards have been through the air so far this season. For me, right, if Brandon Staley can't figure it out this week, like... my God, right? Fire yourself. I mean, it feels like in totality, Staley's lost his edge, right? Not aggressive on 4th down anymore, even in spots that aren't even considered aggressive.
Uncharacteristic punts last week that just left me scratching my head.
Well, I mean, he feels the pressure, feels the heat, and he's kowtowing to the media. He doesn't want to have to answer the difficult questions after the game. And I think we saw him storm out of a couple difficult questions that were asked him, and he kind of left the presser. His defense is abysmal right now. Dead last in defensive efficiency through 2 games, 29th in EPA per play. The thing here is, like, your defense is built to stop the pass, and Minnesota isn't a threat to run. The Vikings offensive line is just not generating movement up front. And you look in totality, right? Like averaging negative 0.67 EPA per rush Minnesota is. It's dead last in the NFL. Nearly twice as bad as the second worst run offense. So you go and trade for Cam Akers. I don't know. I haven't followed that situation close enough. Obviously, he knows Kevin O'Connell's system because he was with him, in Los Angeles. Is it going to be implemented right away? I have no idea. So to me, like, the focus is Cousins, it's Jefferson, it's Addison, it's Hawkinson. If you can kind of strip out things, right? Like strip out the 4th quarter where the Vikings are just frantically playing catch up. The passing offense isn't really humming either for the Vikings, right? It's just average. Now, the Buccaneers and Eagles are 2+ defenses they've played so far. So theoretically, right, the Vikings offense, especially their pass offense, is stepping down in class here by a sizable amount. You mentioned some of the offensive linemen, right? Vikings left tackle Christian Darrisaw battling an ankle injury. I think he ultimately plays. He did get a limited in on Wednesday, and then the drop-off is so massive, right? I mean, like the backup left tackle's on IR. I don't think Garrett Bradbury is good, so whether he plays with the back injury or not a big deal to me. Austin Schlottman has been relatively better than the low bar that Bradbury's been setting. I'm just not completely in love with the Vikings offense relative to the weapons they have. I mean, it's just a lot of dudes out there. But I do think they're able to move the ball through the air. I was kind of willing to give Staley a pass getting torched by the Dolphins, but Ryan Tannehill, I mean, just carved up the Chargers secondary too. I believe he completed like 11 of 13 balls outside to his receivers. You would think Justin Jefferson and Addison are going to have a day, especially maybe some explosives. I mean, we're stating the obvious here, right? Like this total opened 50. We're out to 54. Like we're expecting, a little bit of an offensive outburst here. I just, I haven't gotten there yet, Todd, but I'm not sure I can quit the Chargers just yet. This might be
They are the dangerous siren on the rocks, the temptress that lures you in because all of that tantalizing talent that just can't seem to make the plays when they need to the most. But two teams, no doubt, in desperation mode at this point, starting 0-2 after making the postseason a year ago. We'll see who puts it together for a full 60 minutes on Sunday afternoon. A little bit of a surprise start in the nation's capital for the Washington Commanders so far this year, Payne. They come into this game 2-0, playing host to the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo less than a touchdown favorite, laying 6.5 on the road. Total in this game down a touch from the open at 43.5, with Mother Nature potentially having her say in how this game will get played. Familiar foes on opposing sidelines. When you look at Sean McDermott, he was on the Panthers staff from 2011 to 2016 with Ron Rivera as the head coach. The Commanders starting 2-0 for the first time since the 2011 season. With a win here, they would start 3-0 for the first time since 2005. Now, it hasn't all been great for Washington. They've started slow. They got themselves behind the 8 ball, 21-3 last week against Denver. Needed a play from behind against the Arizona Cardinals in week 1 as well. This is interesting when you consider that Washington becomes just the first 2-0 team to be a home underdog of more than 5 points since the 2011 Buffalo Bills taking on the New England Patriots. Buffalo, Payne, offensively last week took what the Raiders gave them. Josh Allen didn't need to be uber aggressive. It was a lot of too high safety looks from the Raiders, so Josh Allen was extremely efficient, threw underneath, put together long time consuming drives, and they cashed them in for 7. You saw all the running backs get involved. You saw a number of receivers into the mix. When you look at Buffalo and the best path to success against this Commanders defense, do we see Allen start to get more aggressive like he was week 1 against the Jets, or is it a combination of what we've seen through the first 2 weeks from Buffalo?
It's a great question, and the Bills' offense certainly has a new look to it. I'm not sure I'm quite in love with it, but just using far more heavy sets, significantly shorter passes with James Cook more involved in the pass game. Some of the low air yard numbers for Josh Allen is certainly the way the Raiders play defense, and with just 2 data points, right? The sample is so small it's going to skew some things. But what's interesting, when you look at the Bills' new offense, it might actually be really effective in this specific spot against the Commanders' defense. Right now, Buffalo's using the highest rate of 2 tight end sets, right, with Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. 51% rate on first down, 50% on all downs. The next closest team using 2 tight end sets is at 36%. And if you look through 2 games against Josh Dobbs and soon-to-be 35-year-old Russell Wilson, Washington's allowed a 52% success rate against passes from 2 tight end sets. It's the 7th worst rate in the league. Washington also 27th in EPA allowed on runs from 2 tight end sets. So you would expect some success from the Bills' offense. Stephon Diggs, probably a decent game because Jack Del Rio loves playing man coverage. Diggs' route participation, people thought would tick down this year. It's actually up 95% the first 2 games. And if you look over his career, Diggs gets targeted on 30% of routes against man coverage. So on paper, like, the Bills' offense should find success here. The problem is, we need to keep our eye on the weather, right? There's a system that's brewing along the coast, right, in the Carolinas and in the Virginia area. It hasn't been strong enough to be named and elevated to a tropical storm, but it could have an impact on this game. It's why we've seen the total dip from as high as 46 down through the 44, and now we're basically 43.5 across the board.
What have you made of Washington's defense so far this year? Chase Young obviously had his impact felt, contributed to one of the more momentum-giving plays when they trailed 21-3. I mean, do we think this Washington defense is going to scratch the surface of all the accolades that people have heaped on him for years, or are we not that impressed, at least through 2 data points?
It's been bizarre, right? That's as frank as I can put it. I was shocked with how it performed early against Denver. I thought Dobbs had more success than we envisioned. Yep. And if you look at the schedule-adjusted metrics, right, Washington's kind of like outside the top 10 right now. But if you look at some of the EPA numbers, certainly not as attractive. And I thought this was a unit that we knew didn't have a ton of depth along the defensive line, even though the starters are fantastic. Got some young guys in the secondary to help out there. I was expecting more. This is certainly going to be a really good test. And I think we'll find out a little bit more as they step up in class here against the Buffalo offense. Now, again, they might get aided here by some weather, so it becomes difficult. But, early on in the season, it's good to kind of spot some things in advance, but the data is certainly not the end-all, be-all because the sample size is so small. So I think when it's all said and done, the Commanders' defense will certainly have a very stout unit if they're able to stay healthy along the defensive line. Again, like we saw Payne go down, he did return. Yep. Chase Young's kind of battled through some injuries. You like some of those young guys. Forbes has stepped up into a role immediately. You would think he gets better as the season progresses. So, but certainly some tough offenses within that division with Philadelphia and Dallas. So you're going to need the Commanders' defense to be better.
When we look on the other side of the ball, Sam Howell obviously has taken over as starting quarterback there and has answered a few questions, at least early on. Again, a very small sample size. But we saw improvements from game 1 against Arizona to game 2 against Denver. They pressured him early, wasn't rattled, was able to lead what essentially amounted to a 32-3 run from the Commanders to get out of Denver with a 2-point victory. The Commanders showed balance in the second half that they didn't display, chasing a deficit early, 9 passes to 16 runs in the second half after throwing it 30 times and running it just 9 times in the first half. 7.6 yards per play, and a lot of that came from the screen game. They still haven't been overly efficient when you look at how they're extending drives on third down, but we know the Commanders have some weapons, especially in the passing game, that oftentimes are a little bit underrated in Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. In steps a Buffalo Bills defense that held Josh Jacobs to -2 rushing yards on 9 rushes. It was the first time since the 1970 merger that the reigning rushing champion finished the game with negative rushing yards. But Sam Howell didn't mince words. He said, look, this is going to be the best defense that we faced, at least through the first 2 weeks. When we look at Buffalo and some of their personnel against Washington, how do we see things unfolding here?
Yeah, I think, again, some variance on this side of the matchup because we like some of the weapons that the Commanders have, and I think Sam Howell provides hope. But in the opener against what I believe to be a really poor Cardinals defense, it just didn't look great. I mean, the Commanders were successful in 39% of their snaps against Arizona, negative 0.22 EPA per play. Certainly some of that was skewed based upon the ridiculous swings and turnovers there. But it also didn't look pretty for the Commanders early against Denver either. But suddenly in the second half, right, I mean, Commanders offense starts firing on all cylinders. So I don't know which version of the Washington offense you get here. Sam Howell was smart to recognize that they are stepping up in class because it's the best defense they've faced so far. Now, matchup-wise, it's kind of the inverse of the other side of the ball where, Eric Bieniemy and the Commanders offense basically just living out of 3 wide receiver sets, and Washington's passing at the 7th highest rate in the league from these 3 wide receiver sets. Buffalo, despite facing Zach Wilson and, a Raiders offense that was without Jacoby Myers and then lost Devontae Adams late, they're 23rd in EPA per pass allowed against these 3 wide receiver set passes. So, we had questions, if you remember, about the Bills secondary coming into the season. Would Tre'Davious White return to his pre-injury form? Through 2 data points, the answer is no. I tried to gently let Bills fans know in our preview that Kaiir Elam was struggling mightily, and I think I had about 10-plus DMs from Bills Mafia members telling me how wrong I was, that Kaiir Elam was looking fantastic, right? Didn't earn a starting role, was a healthy scratch against the Raiders. So effectively, it's White, it's Benford, it's Johnson manning the corner spots. None have started the season all that well. So again, I think there's some variance here that's making it difficult to project. Like, which Commanders' offense are you getting? What the Commanders do has given the Bills trouble, but they're clearly stepping up in class. This is a Bills defense, though, that we pegged for early season regression, that we projected that they might have some issues stopping the pass a little bit. Throw in the weather, throw in a couple injuries to monitor to Micah Hyde and Leonard Floyd, who left the Raiders game early with injuries. Didn't return, didn't practice on Wednesday. Today's obviously the key day for those two, so keep kind of glued to Buffalo's practice report. But what we do know is anytime Washington touches 7, very real professional money is taking a bite out of the Commanders this week.
Such an interesting team. Look, I'm not completely sold on Washington thus far through 2 games. They look significantly better offensively than I anticipated, but we'll see exactly how they perform here in what'll be their biggest test to date. You can follow.
Yeah, this is the big one, right? Like we expected them to beat Arizona.
Yes.
Right? Like, they were 7-point favorite. That was the game. They were the largest favorite in this season. When you look at the projected numbers, I think we used them in some of our Survivor stuff. But then you're down 21-3 to Denver. A Denver team that's projected to win, at the time, 8 games. Now, I understand the comeback was awesome, but you look at this schedule, it's still very, very difficult. And I think the problem this season so far, and I'll just be open and honest, and we didn't really address this at the top, is we saw a ton of under money week 1 come into the market, and a lot of those games stayed under, and it was just the culmination of teams not playing guys in the preseason and some weather. And then all of a sudden, I look at the week 2 board, and more under money's coming in. I can't figure out why. And it just kind of kept me on the sidelines for a bunch of stuff. We saw a bunch of games go over. It's like our data points here, typically early in the season, right, aren't the best. But then you're throwing in the weather. And there's more weather this week, apparently, going up and down the coast. It's just, you would have liked to have gotten a really good data point to figure out, what Buffalo is, what Washington is. And I'm not sure we get it with the weather.
Yeah, you mentioned Washington and what their schedule looks like. Not to go off on a tangent before we close the book on this game. They'll play host to Buffalo on Sunday, as we just previewed. They'll go on the road against a divisional rival in Philly. They get a game on a short week against the much-maligned Chicago Bears at home, and then back-to-back road games against the Falcons and at the Giants. So plenty for the Commanders still to prove if they're going to be a little bit of a dark horse. Not to win the division, of course, but to compete for one of those wild card spots in the NFC. You can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. As we'll remind you every single week until you do so, sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. It's additional content right to your inbox every Friday during the fall. Not only a reminder for the things you may have missed on the website's various podcasts, but also an additional best bet in the prop market. Can't give those out on Thursday's show. The market's not liquid enough, but we've had a couple of rocking chairs, and we'll hope that trend continues throughout the course of the regular season. Speaking of rocking chairs, Payne, it's been a rocking chair for every opponent that's taken on the Chicago Bears, at least through the first 2 weeks. And the Bears will go to Arrowhead on Sunday as nearly 2 touchdown underdogs to take on the defending Super Bowl champions. Total in this game, 47.5 to 48, depending on where you shop. And we'll call it the Matt Nagy revenge game. The Bears have now lost 12 straight games, gone just 2-10 ATS during that 12-game losing skid. And Justin Fields in his 24 starts, 6-17 and 1 ATS. And because you've built such cachet and confidence in your fan base and coaching staff, the best way to ingratiate yourself to them is to throw them under the bus in the Chicago media, then quickly backpedal about the robotic actions. But look, Fields isn't the only one to blame for everything that's gone on in Chicago. We can look at the metrics, we can look at the play calling, the decision making. I know the Bears group chat with some of my buddies, they're ready to jump off a bridge given the way things have gone so far. But when you look at the Bears offense, clearly something's broken. I'm not sure where to point the finger. There are so many different right answers that are out there.
It's at least a little warmer this time of year if you are going to jump off the bridge in Chicago. So
yeah, Chicago River's not too cold right now. Better to do it now than if you wait until December or January. It can typically be a little bit iced over.
So, I kind of think back to our off season, and I think 2 of our stronger stances are colliding here, right? We were adamant that Justin Fields wasn't him, as the kids now say. And Bears fans weren't happy about that.
No, they were not.
Only 2 data points. right? The season's young, plenty of time to turn things around. But, right now Justin Fields is only ahead of Zach Wilson in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. He's calling out the coaching staff for effectively putting too much on his plate, was smart enough to kind of take a deep breath, take a step back, then during the second interview in the locker room said it's on him. Our second stance that we took was, basically look out for the Chiefs defense. The improvement last year as the season progressed was evident if you knew what to look for. And from week 7 onward, the Chiefs were 8th in schedule adjusted defensive efficiency last year. And then heading into this season, the young athletic parts in the back kind of knew how to handle being thrown into the fire last year, and those guys are really starting to mold together nicely. The linebacker group is 4 deep and versatile, allowing Spags to kind of be multiple there. The D-line had some depth. Now Chris Jones returns. Charles Omenihu returns week 7. So I think you're going to have a defense here that surprises some people, and obviously, what the Chiefs have done so far through 2 data points, wildly impressive when you think about, 2 top 10 offenses to start this season in the Lions and Jaguars. And right now, again, it's only 2 data points, but Chiefs are 8th in EPA allowed. Specific to this matchup, I think, the one thing that everyone was kind of clamoring for this offseason to kind of expedite the growth of Justin Fields was the larger route tree, right? Allow him to make easier passes, put a little bit more on his plate. And again, now he's claiming he's thinking too much. The real problem is, for me, the change has been too drastic. You look at Fields' ADOT, it's dipped more than 4 yards per attempt season over season. And this past Sunday against the Bucs, 3.1 air yards per attempt for Fields. It was the shortest of his career. And that's where the Chiefs defense excels, right? They're 6th in both EPA per pass allowed and completion percentage allowed on throws under 10 yards. You really want to attack them deep. I know Mooney says he's going to play. He's a little dinged. He's kind of their deep threat. And if Spags has watched film and kind of understands the personnel, I would expect him to dial back blitzes and play more coverage this week. Right now, the Chiefs are 6th in blitz rate. I would think you want to ditch that a little bit, dial it back, especially with Chris Jones returning, right? I mean, the Chiefs have a better chance getting natural pressure. The on-off field splits for pressure with Chris Jones are massive. The Bears starting left tackle, Braxton Jones, is out, placed on IR with a neck injury. Tevin Jenkins, the Bears left guard, started the season on IR. I expect starting center Lucas Patrick to play, but he's dealing with an illness midway through the week. Nate Davis missed last week due to a personal reason. Rookie right tackle Darnell Wright has been serviceable in pass protection, but you just think about that trio that's potentially starting in the middle for the Bears offensive line, right? It's been a problem. It's Cody Whitehair, it's Lucas Patrick, it's Nate Davis. Out of 72 guards, Davis and Whitehair are 68th and 64th in pass protection. Lucas Patrick dead last among qualifying centers. So I think they were hoping Chris Jones wasn't going to be back this early. When you kind of hear Justin Fields, he's talking about playing more free. I fully expect that to mean that he's going to run more in this spot. And then you look at what the Chiefs defense did last season. They played a handful of mobile quarterbacks, right? They saw Kyler Murray. They got Josh Allen, Malik Willis, Bryce Perkins. Spags did a good job defending mobile quarterbacks, only allowed 4.2 yards per rush against those 4 mobile quarterbacks, not a singular touchdown as well. There's been a move to the under, right? Chris opened a little bit lower than other spots. Some spots opened 50, but Chris opened 49. Down to 47. Saw a little bit of money come in this morning as we start to record here at like 47.5. If the Chiefs keep the Bears offense in check, there's a pretty strong trend. And I am not a trend guy, so if I'm sharing it, probably worth jotting down. But if you look since 2019,
grab my pen.
The Chiefs defense has held an opponent to 20 or less 36 times. Those games have gone under 32 times. So it's very much dependent on what the opponent's doing and if they are pushing the Chiefs to score. The other interesting thing here, and I know this is going to be a key factor game for us because the spread was so large and, the Bears are 0-2, but you got to keep an eye on Jackson's injury in the back end for the Bears. Obviously, they lose their DC, but you have Matt Eberflus. He's the brains behind the defense, so I don't expect much to change. But the one thing the Bears have done this year, been a little bit better defensively, they're playing a lot of zone. And through 2 games, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense has been horrific against zone. And you look at the injury report, Kadarius Toney probably trending towards not playing. Maybe it's MVS, but you really got to hit these guys over the top because they've done a good job keeping some things in front, and the Chiefs have struggled against zone so far this season. So I'm a little surprised to see some money come back over here this morning on this one.
Look, it's a big number here. To your point, we'll see if Kansas City gets pushed or they can build a comfortable lead early, take their foot off the accelerator, and grind this thing to a halt in the ballpark of that 31-13 threshold or thereabouts. I mean, you mentioned Justin Fields, and obviously he should shoulder a good amount of the responsibility, but it's not entirely on him, as the Bears, to your point, have made much more drastic changes to their offense than I think a lot of us anticipated. And one of the most notable things for me were the designed runs completely taken out of the mix. I mean, he's only had 2 per game through the first 2 games where he averaged roughly 5 last year. And you saw the rushing yards or lack thereof on full display, albeit against a good defensive front in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week. If that part's out of the mix, I'm not sure Khalil Herbert and Rashawn Johnson are capable of picking up the slack. Into the Sunday night slate, and it's a matchup of marquee franchises between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Las Vegas Raiders. We're looking at the Raiders now a 2.5-point favorite in this game, total at 43. And the Steelers won the last matchup on Christmas Eve last season, 13-10, effectively ending the Derek Carr era out here in Vegas. Kenny Pickett completed a touchdown pass to George Pickens with just 46 seconds remaining. When we look at minor trends, and these are more for information than actionable, the Steelers now have 5 straight covers in prime time after their improbable victory against the Cleveland Browns on Monday night. Meanwhile, the Raiders have been the over kings when the lights are at their brightest. 8 straight overs in primetime, actually the longest active streak in the league. Steelers offensively, Payne, I mean, they've been downright offensive through the first 2 games of the season. 2 offensive touchdowns, and Mike Tomlin kept talking about getting their mojo back. But you look at the offense under Matt Canada's leadership, points per game at 19, that's 26th in the league. Yards per game, 315, 26th in the league. Yards per play, 31st in the league. And 20-plus yard plays, 110 of them, 28th in the league. This will be a step down in class, though, for Pittsburgh offensively. He matched up against the Browns defense that I think is vastly underrated in mainstream media. We know how good the 49ers are. In steps a Raiders team that will allow you to take the underneath stuff, and that's typically where Pittsburgh has been very comfortable with check down Charlie type stuff. You'd hope that there's more Jalen Warren involved than Najee Harris, who looks like he's carrying a piano on his back. But the Steelers' offensive game plan against the Raiders defense, who's got the edge?
I mean, this is quite the matchup, right? Number 32 Steelers offense versus number 31 Raiders defense. Let's go. That doesn't get the plums tingling Sunday night. I don't know what will. The difference between the 2 units, though, when I look at this matchup, right? The Steelers offense had expectation. It has talent. I'll exclude Max Crosby from the conversation, but the Raiders defense doesn't have a ton of talent, so it didn't have high expectation. I think that's kind of the difference here. So if there were to be one of these units that, kind of plays to a level that we expected, it would be the Steelers offense. I think the problem is Matt Canada, and we haven't been overly high on Matt Canada, right? That's been pretty well known, and surprisingly, he was retained this offseason. I think he fooled some people during the preseason, kind of thinking he might change his ways. Again, it's early. Still time to improve, but right now, I think Matt Canada is running the most predictable offense in the NFL. When Kenny Pickett lines up in shotgun, the Steelers pass 83% of the time. When Kenny Pickett's under center, the Steelers run 90% of the time. Might as well just invite the defense into the huddle. And you think about all the things that we've talked about over the years that are going to help a young quarterback. Play action, one of them. Through 2 games, Matt Canada has allowed Kenny Pickett to throw with play action at a league-low 9% rate. Maybe when you're under center, you kind of nix the 90% run rate and get Kenny Pickett throwing play action. That might be a novel idea here. The Steelers are not using enough motion, but when they do, Matt Canada somehow doesn't know how to use it correctly because they're not really getting a lot of efficiency out of it. Certainly not getting the efficiency out of using motion relative to what the rest of the offenses in the league are doing. You look at the route trees and the concepts, like just painfully obvious, right? Like Matt Canada doesn't have a passing game that threatens the middle of the field at all. If you look right now at Kenny Pickett's spray chart, 4 of 76 pass attempts have been thrown between the hashes. Okay. And then you think about the fact that Pittsburgh's run game has been abysmal, right? 31st in rushing success rate. So you have a very predictable offense that's throwing to very predictable areas of the field that is also not able to run the ball. I think here's the positive, right? They're stepping way down in class, to your point. I think if the Browns and 49ers defenses stay healthy, they'll both be in the hunt for top 5 status, right, come season's end. Now, the Steelers offense, you get a Raiders defense that allows you to be comfortable. Now, Kenny Pickett has been abysmal from a clean pocket, but it's just you don't expect that to continue at the rate he's playing from a clean pocket. So my point here is, like, when you look at the Raiders defense, it's like they don't get pressure. Dead last in the NFL through 2 data points. The Raiders play off coverage. They've allowed 82% of pass attempts to be completed thus far. Now, Patrick Graham's hinted in his presser that he'll be a little bit more aggressive in this spot. We'll see. It's not like he hasn't sent pressure, right? I mean, the Raiders have blitzed an above league average rate. It just hasn't gotten home. So to me, like, this is very much about the X's and O's. This is not about the Jimmies and Joes. If Pittsburgh doesn't find relative success offensively in this spot, whether it's going to the quick short pass game, whether it's using motion correctly, whether it's getting Kenny Pickett to throw with play action, whether it's getting Kenny Pickett to use the middle of the field, right? If Matt Canada doesn't start camouflaging things better, if Matt Canada doesn't allow Kenny Pickett to look competent in this spot, you mentioned earlier about teams heading to Vegas early. Like, Mike Tomlin has to leave Matt Canada in Vegas and fire him if this does not look competent on Sunday night.
Look, I mean, the Steelers were given a false sense of security last year with that run that they put together late in the season. It wasn't as if the offense suddenly fired on all cylinders. They were the beneficiaries of stepping down in class, playing a softer schedule, and that probably gave Matt Canada a stay of execution. I was blown away in Kenny Pickett's short career. He is yet to have a game with multiple touchdown passes. We'll see if that can change this weekend. And you mentioned the Raiders allowing an 82% completion record. How bad is that? That's actually the worst completion percentage allowed by any team through 2 games in NFL history. So if the Steelers, to your point, can't get on track offensively this week, it may never come for them. Now, on the other side of the ball, the Raiders' offense protection has been tremendous through the first 2 games of the season. They're the only team in the league not to allow a sack after allowing 35 last season. They've only allowed 5 quarterback hits in total, and Jimmy G's been pressured on just 14.8% of his dropbacks. Even more impressive when you consider they couldn't get the ground game going last week against the Bills, but it didn't stop Garoppolo from getting intercepted not once, but twice in that particular spot. When we look at the injury situation, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, both trending better, but we still don't know with 100% certainty if they'll be out there in the mix. The Steelers defensively are good for the splash plays. We know they can rush the passer. Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt, you'll see them on highlight reels from now until the cows come home, but it's still a Steelers run defense, Payne, that gave up nearly 200 yards on the ground. And while Nick Chubb obviously had his say before he left with that gruesome injury, the backside contain was downright awful against Jerome Ford. And it wasn't like once Nick Chubb was out, suddenly the Steelers' run defense became the steel curtain.
Got to contain your backside in Vegas. That's key.
Bad things happen when you don't watch the backside out here.
So this is really interesting to me. Is like the Raiders right now have 15 possessions total through 2 games on offense, and it's partly because of the defense playing that bend but don't break style and teams completing short passes and the clock's just ticking. So there's not a ton to go on here, and candidly, I'm a little surprised. Like, Josh McDaniels, offensive-minded head coach, is allowing his defensive coordinator Patrick Graham to play a style that just leaves his offense on the sidelines picking their ass. But you look at the scripts; they've been fantastic in both games for the Raiders. Jimmy G in the Raiders pass game has been wildly efficient, 4th in EPA per pass, 9th in efficiency. And I think you are going to get Jacoby Myers back. I know he hasn't cleared quite yet, but typically, those are 1 week protocols. But the volume just hasn't been there. The run game, to your point, has been horrific. And it's difficult, right, playing with small sample sizes, because you mentioned the Raiders O-line being fantastic in pass protection. And it was the inverse last year. They couldn't pass protect. They could move people in the ground game. Now all of a sudden they can't move people in the ground game. It's virtually the same exact personnel. So it's tough to kind of gauge what's going on there, right? I would expect Jimmy G to face more pressure in this spot, right? I mean, the Steelers got to Brock Purdy on 44% of his dropbacks. They got to a mobile Deshaun Watson on 39% of his Monday night, which led to the 2 defensive scores. Jimmy G, shockingly too, is holding on to the ball quite a long time relative to what he was doing in San Francisco, nearly 3 seconds per drop back. And so, I mean, seeing that O-line be able to pass protect is really interesting. Now, short week for the Steelers, having played Monday night, physical division game. You're traveling across the country. The defense is banged up, right? Cam Hayward already out. And then you have Patrick Peterson, Minka, DeMonte Casey, Marcus Golden, Larry Ogunjobi. They all did not practice on Wednesday, so we're going to have to monitor those. I would think the Raiders find more success on the ground compared to the first 2 games, right? With Cam Hayward out, one of the best run stuffers. I mean, send them to the Hall of Fame already. And then if Ogunjobi misses, that's your top 2 guys on the interior. We're already not in love with the Steelers linebacker group. So Pittsburgh could be a little soft up the middle in this spot. What's wild to me, Todd, is for a game on paper with so much variance, one of the strongest stances we've seen on a side without, quarterback injury has been taken, right? I mean, from +1 out to as high as -3 here on the Raiders. My guess, unless most of those guys on the Steelers injury report missed this game, +3 on Pittsburgh is going to get zapped, I would believe.
Now, what's interesting about the Raiders is it's a team that, we talked about coming into the year that professional bettors were looking to oppose. They bet them under their win total. They took a couple of the derivative markets. But this will now, assuming that this market trajectory continues, make 3 straight weeks where the Raiders are taking money in the betting market. We saw them move from that peak of 4 against Denver, came down. We thought that was a play against Denver. Last week, in a game that didn't set up from a situational spot, there was still respected sharp money that pushed that down to a full touchdown against the Bills at a lot of the sharpest books out there. Now, it didn't get home. The Bills win 38-10, but we're seeing it again for the 3rd straight week. So always interesting when you see some of the conflicting market indicators, especially early on in the season.
Yeah, so just for full disclosure, right, we're one of the people who bet the Raiders under 7.5, and it eventually closed like 6.2, and division under 2.5 wins, -140 that closed like -220. So your point is well made there. Now I will kind of say this: week 1, little bit of a conflicting battle there, right? Denver -3 got laid. Then all of a sudden the injury report just looks abysmal, right? They just guys going down left and right up front at receiver. I mean, Denver had basically lost 3 guys from its receiver core. But yes, to your point, once it got to like 5, 4.5, 4, we did see money week 1 come in on the Raiders. Week 2, you got to make an adjustment for Buffalo losing, right? So there was some early money there, but if you watch the market closely, the few spots that touched 7
they got hit.
Immediately got hit with Buffalo. And Buffalo was one of the sharpest teaser sides from professional bettors last week as well. This, to your point, I think is very much a downgrade of Pittsburgh from what we've seen the last 2 weeks. Now you get the tough travel spot with the Monday night division game, guys beat up, traveling across the country now. So I think that's part of it. But I think, there's a couple threes that flashed. Again, if this injury report does not look completely barren, right? Like it's terrible for the Steelers defense. My feeling is the 3s get zapped.
What, you mean the 3.72 yards per play that the Pittsburgh Steelers were able to put forth against the Cleveland Browns, if you back out the 71-yard touchdown pass to George Pickens, doesn't lead you to believe that this is going to be a high-powered offensive juggernaut every single Sunday that they strap on the cleats?
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I saw this somewhere. Pittsburgh did not get into the 30-yard line of the Browns defense. They did not penetrate the 30 on Monday Night Football. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Yeah.
And I believe they were the first team to win a game doing that, I want to say, in 5 to 6 years without running a play inside their opposition's 30-yard line.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the spot. I mean, you hate to be hot takey and drastic, but my feeling is if Pittsburgh's offense just throws up on themselves, Matt Canada probably does not go back to Pittsburgh, the offensive coordinator of the Steelers. And this is one of like the most loyal, organizations in football. But I mean, it's bad. And I don't know how long it can continue because you have young cogs offensively, right? That you just kind of want to see them in year 2 start to show improvement. And if your offensive coordinator is the one stunting that improvement, you probably got to let him go, because it was 50-50. He was going to retain his job this offseason, and now you get potentially a third bad data point here. Like, how long can you let this go on?
A de facto swing game of sorts, knowing that the Steelers will go on the road next week to take on the Houston Texans. A hell of a lot better being 2-1 going into another winnable game week 4 than staring down a 1-2 start, knowing that Baltimore has the potential to go to 3-0 as more than a touchdown favorite this weekend against the Indianapolis Colts. You can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, you can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, this is the portion of the program where we put all of our hard work to good use and find the most actionable element that we've identified on the Week 3 slate.
Boy, the listeners may send me to the sun here, but didn't show up last week. Didn't show up last week. By the way, you see the steam there on the Monday night game there. It's a good bet. Whoever just bet that, smart people. So we've only bet one thing this week in the NFL, and it's moved, and I don't really want to give it out at a lesser number. There's about 4 things we're waiting on, 2 of which are weather related, 2 of which are quarterback related. And so I would like to get the optimal number and not send out something to our folks here that isn't the optimal number. So I kind of want to punt and tell everyone to visit the website before Sunday, where we will have a best bet waiting for them well before kickoff on Sunday. Is that allowed?
Look,
what do we think?
The one good thing about us running our own business as a 2-man operation is we get to make our own rules. It's not going to make listeners happy, as we know all too well, but at the same time, our goal is to try and make everybody money wherever we see fit, and rather than just giving out picks that we actually haven't invested in, it catches us between a rock and a hard place, to say the least.
Okay. Let's punt until Sunday. We'll have something. Let's just kind of see what this weather system does here. That's hitting the coast. And then we'll check back in on a couple potential quarterback situations brewing. So we will have something. We'll post on the website, bettheboardpodcast.com. We'll finagle this so the NFL shows atop the site, Todd?
Yeah, we'll make sure that that's up there, so it's easy for people to try and find rather than scrolling around the site to try and be able to track it down. So that'll be up there.
And
Sunday morning,
you'll just see
well
that
in advance.
Yeah, you'll just see that atop the website there. You'll click the read more button on the podcast, and we'll put it up atop that podcast page. So, yeah, it's been a little bit of a weird market, as I alluded to before. Not a ton of great data points to start the season, and now you throw in a little bit of this tropical storm potentially hitting the coast here, and a couple quarterback question marks, and we don't really want to give something out. Obviously, right, 1-2 to start the season in the NFL. College football has been scorching hot, so hopefully everyone's betting everything we give out. And that's kind of how you eliminate some of the variance with a larger sample size. But we kind of don't want to give out something that we haven't bet yet here that's potentially going to move against us here with weather or quarterback. So, again, website, Sunday morning, bettheboardpodcast.com. You'll see a best bet there waiting for you.
Be able to make it happen. Sometimes, look, discretion, the better part of valor. I know it's not what some folks want that are out there itching for action, but our goal is to try and come up with the most actionable elements, give you guys, some of the best prices that are out there with stuff that we've bet ourselves. And when it hasn't been the case so far this week, tough to just kind of manufacture a play. So passing until the weekend, I want to wish all of you guys the best of luck with all of your investments for NFL Week 3, beginning as early as tonight with the Thursday night game between the 49ers and New York Football Giants. So in the interim, best of luck, and hopefully we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.